Hi guys, welcome back to SMB Designs. My name is Stephanie, and we are continuing this week in the book of Enoch, and we're going to pick up in chapter 84. We're making it, guys. We're at chapter 80 out of 108 for Enoch. So do let me know what book you think would be good to go through in the Bible next, and leave that in the comments below. That would be awesome. And if you don't mind, hit the like button and give this video a comment. If you're not subscribed, subscribe. It's cheap, it's fun, it's free. So just hit those buttons for me. That would be a big help to the channel. And we will go ahead and jump in at chapter 84. And I lifted up my hands in righteousness and blessed the Holy and Great One, and spoke with the breath of my mouth, and with the tongue of flesh, which God has made for the children of the flesh of men, that they should speak therewith. And he gave them breath and a tongue and a mouth, that they should speak therewith. Blessed be you, O Lord, King, great and mighty in your greatness, Lord of the whole creation of heaven, King of kings and God of the whole world. And your power and kingship and greatness abide forever and ever. And throughout all generations your dominion and all heavens are your throne forever, and the whole earth your footstool forever and ever. For you have made and you rule all things, and nothing is too hard for you. Wisdom never departs from the place of your throne, nor turns away from your presence. You know and see and hear everything, and there is nothing hidden from you, for you see everything. And now the angels of your heavens are guilty of trespass, and on the flesh of men abide your wrath until the great day of judgment. And now, O God and Lord and great King, I implore and beseech you to fulfill my prayer, to leave me a posterity on earth, and not destroy all the flesh of man, and make the earth without inhabitant, so that there should be an eternal destruction. And now, my Lord, destroy from the earth the flesh which has aroused your wrath, but the flesh of righteousness and uprightness establish as an eternal plant, bearing seed forever. And hide not your face from the prayer of your servant, O Lord. Let's see, there's an author's note here, and because it is so large, I'll read this top little bit to you. In chapter 85 and following, a series of animals is mentioned. These seem to refer to nations or ethnicities. For example, the eagles may refer to the Roman Empire. The Islamic nation is represented by the asses. Abraham may be the white bull. Jacob is a sheep. Egyptians are wolves, and so on. See Daniel chapter 10 for other like imagery. Okay, we're going to skip on down to chapter 85. And after this I saw another dream, and I will show the whole dream to you, my son. And Enoch lifted up his voice and spoke to his son Methuselah. I will speak to you, my son. Hear my words. Incline your ear to the dream or vision of your father. Before I married your mother Edna, I saw in a vision on my bed, and behold, a bull came out from the earth, and that bull was white. And after it came out a heifer, and along with this later came out two bulls, one of them black and the other one red. And that black bull gored the red one, and pursued him over the earth. And then I could no longer see that red bull, but that black bull grew, and that heifer went with him. And I saw that many oxen proceeded from him, which resembled and followed him. And that cow, the first one, went from the presence of that first bull in order to seek that red one, but found him not, and mourned with a great lamentation, and sought him. And I looked until the first bull came to her and quieted her. And from that time onward she cried no more. And after that she bore another white bull, and after him she bore many bulls and black cows. And I saw in my sleep that white bull likewise grew and became a great white bull, and from him proceeded many white bulls, and they resembled him, and they began to father many white bulls, which resembled them, one following another. Chapter 86. And again I looked with my eyes as I slept, and I saw the heaven above, and behold, a star fell from heaven, and it arose and ate and pastured among those oxen, or bull. And after that I saw the large and the black oxen, or bulls, and behold, they all changed their stalls and pastures and their heifers, and began to live with each other. And again I saw in the vision, and looked towards heaven, and behold, I saw many stars descend, and cast themselves down from heaven to the first star. And they became bulls among those cattle, and pastured with them. And I looked at them, and saw they all let out their private members, like horses, and began to mount the cows of the bulls. And they all became pregnant, and bore elephants, camels, and asses. And all the bulls feared them, and were frightened of them, and began to bite their teeth, and to devour, and to gore with their horns. And moreover, they began to devour those oxen, and behold, all the children of the earth began to tremble and shake before them, and to flee from them. Chapter 87. And again I saw how they began to gore each other, and to devour each other, and the earth began to cry aloud. And I raised my eyes again to heaven, and I saw in the vision, and behold, there came out from heaven beings who were like white men, and four went out from that place, and three others with them. And those three that had come out last grasped me by my hand, and took me up away from the generations of the earth, and raised me up to a high place, and showed me a tower raised high above the earth, and all the hills were lower. And one said to me, Remain here until you see everything that falls those elephants, camels, and asses, and the stars, and the oxen, and all of them. Chapter 88. And I saw one of those four who had come out first, and he seized that first star which had fallen from heaven, and bound it hand and foot, and cast it into an abyss. Now that abyss was narrow and deep, and horrible and dark. Side verse here, 2 Peter 2:4. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. Back to verse 2 of chapter 86. And one of them drew a sword, and gave it to those elephants, and camels, and asses. Then they began to smite each other, and the whole earth shook because of them. And as I was beholding in the vision, one of those four who had come out stoned them from heaven, and gathered and took all the great stars whose private members were like those of horses, and bound them all hand and foot, and threw them in the abyss of the earth. Chapter 89. And one of those four went to that white bull and instructed him in a secret, and he was terrified. And he born a bull and became a man, and built for himself a great vessel, and dwelt on it. And 3 bulls dwelt with him in the vessel, and they were covered over. And again I raised my eyes toward heaven, and saw a high roof with 7 water torrents on it, and those torrents flowed with much water into an enclosure. And I looked again, and behold, fountains were opened on the surface of that great enclosure, and the water began to bubble and swell and rise on the surface. And I saw that enclosure until all its surface was covered with water. And the water, the darkness, and mist increased on it. And as I looked at the height of the water, the water had risen above the height of the enclosure, and was streaming over the enclosure, and it stood on earth. And all the cattle of the enclosure were gathered together until I saw how they sank and were swallowed up and perished in that water. But that vessel floated on the water, while all the oxen or bulls and elephants and camels and asses sank to the bottom with all the animals, so that I could no longer see them, and they were not able to escape, but perished and sank into the depths. And again I watched in the vision until those water torrents were removed from that high roof, and the chasms of the earth were leveled up, and other abysses were opened. Then the water began to run down into these abysses until the earth became visible, and that vessel settled on the earth, and the darkness retired, and light appeared. But that white bull, which had become a man, came out of that vessel, and the 3 bulls with him. And one of those 3 was white like that bull, and one of them was red as blood, and one black. And that white bull departed from them. And they began to bring out beasts of the field and birds, so that there arose different genera: lions, tigers, wolves, dogs, hyenas, wild boars, foxes, squirrels, swine, falcons, vultures, kites, eagles, and ravens, and among them was born a white bull. And they began to bite one another. But that white bull which was born among them fathered a wild ass, and a white bull with it, and the wild asses multiplied. But that bull which was born from him fathered a black wild boar, and a white sheep, and the former fathered many boars, but the sheep gave birth to 12 sheep. And when those 12 sheep had grown, they gave up one of them to the asses, and the asses again gave up that sheep to the wolves, and that sheep grew up among the wolves. And the Lord brought the 11 sheep to live with it, and to pasture with it among the wolves, and they multiplied and became many flocks of sheep. And the wolves began to fear them, and they oppressed them until they destroyed their little ones, and they threw their young into a deep river. But those sheep began to cry aloud on account of their little ones, and to complain to their Lord. And a sheep which had been saved from the wolves fled and escaped to the wild asses. And I saw the sheep, how they lamented and cried, and besought their Lord with all their might, until that Lord of the sheep descended at the voice of the sheep from a high abode, and came to them and pastured them. And he called that sheep which had escaped the wolves, and spoke with it concerning the wolves, that it should admonish them not to touch the sheep. And the sheep went to the wolves according to the word of the Lord, and another sheep met it and went with it. And the two went and entered together into the assembly of those wolves, and spoke with them and admonished them not to touch the sheep from then on. And on it I saw the wolves, and how they more harshly oppressed the sheep with all their power, and sheep cried aloud. And the Lord came to the sheep, and they began to beat those wolves. And the wolves began to make lamentation, but the sheep became quiet and ceased to cry out. And I saw the sheep until they departed from among the wolves. But the eyes of the wolves were blinded, and the wolves departed in pursuit of the sheep with all their power. And the Lord of the sheep went with them as their leader, and all his sheep followed him. And his face was dazzling and glorious and terrible to behold. But the wolves began to pursue those sheep until they reached a sea of water. And that sea was divided, and the water stood on this side and on that before their face. And their Lord led them and placed himself between them and the wolves. And as those wolves had not yet seen the sheep, they proceeded into the midst of that sea, and the wolves followed the sheep, and those wolves ran after them into that sea. And when they saw the Lord of the sheep, they turned to flee before his face. But that sea gathered itself together and became as it had been created, and the water swelled and rose until it covered the wolves. And I watched until all the wolves who pursued those sheep perished and were drowned. But the sheep escaped from that water and went out into a wilderness, where there was no water and no grass. And they began to open their eyes and to see. And I saw the Lord of the sheep pasturing them and giving them water and grass, and that sheep going and leading them. And the sheep ascended to the summit of that high rock, and the Lord of the sheep sent it to them. And after that I saw the Lord of the sheep, who stood before them, and his appearance was great and terrible and majestic. And all those sheep saw him and were afraid before his face. And they all feared and trembled because of him. And they cried to that sheep which was among them, We are not able to stand before our Lord or to behold him. And that sheep which led them again ascended to the summit of that rock. And the sheep began to be blinded, to wander from the way which he had shown them. But that sheep did not realize it. And the Lord of the sheep was very angry with them. And that sheep discovered it, and went down from the summit of the rock, and came to the sheep, and found the greatest part of them blinded and fallen away. And when they saw it, they feared and trembled at its presence, and desired to return to their folds. And that sheep took other sheep with it, and came to those sheep which had fallen away, and began to slay them. And the sheep feared its presence, and thus that sheep brought back those sheep that had fallen away, and they returned to their fold. And I saw in this vision until that sheep became a man, and built a house for the Lord of the sheep, and placed all the sheep in that house. And I saw until this sheep which had met that sheep which had led them fell asleep or died, and I saw until all the great sheep perished, and little ones arose in their place. And they came to a pasture, and approached a stream of water. Then that sheep, their leader, which had become a man, withdrew from them, and fell asleep, or died. And all the sheep looked for it, and cried over it with a great crying. And I saw until they left off crying for that sheep, and crossed into stream of water, and there arose the two sheep as leaders as the place of those which had led them and fallen asleep. And I saw until the sheep came to a good place, and a pleasant and glorious land. And I saw until those sheep were satisfied, and that house stood among them in the pleasant land. And sometimes their eyes were opened, and sometimes blinded, until another sheep arose and led them, and brought them all back, and their eyes were opened. And the dogs and the foxes and the wild boars began to devour those sheep, until the Lord of the sheep raised up another sheep, a ram from their midst, which led them. And that ram began to butt on either side those dogs, foxes, and wild boars, until he had destroyed them all. And that sheep, whose eyes were open, saw that ram, which was among the sheep, until it forsook its glory, and began to butt those sheep, and trampled on them, and behaved itself unseemly. And the Lord of the sheep sent the lamb to another lamb, and raised it to being a ram and leader of the sheep, instead of that ram which had forsaken its glory. We're going to stop here in verse 46 of that chapter. That's a really, really long chapter. So I don't want to make this last too overbearingly long for you. So we're going to stop there, and we will pick up next week in the book of Enoch. And I pray you have a blessed week. If you have any prayer requests, please don't hesitate to either leave them in the comment below, or to send me an email. My email address is below as well for you. So I look forward to seeing you all in the next one. And thank you so much. Y'all have a great week. Bye.